Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us, and for everyone tuning in, thanks for coming back. We're just getting ready to get started here for our second half of our summit. Thanks for everybody that watched the first half. The first half was definitely, we wanted to focus on our personal well-being, which is equally as important as that well-being of our careers and our businesses and everything else. And as you'll see, well-being is a part of every conversation because that is, our focus really has shifted as She Ventures to talking about abundance and well-being. I shared in my founder journey that there were periods of time where I definitely I left the well-being part out and focused too much on the abundance or focused too much on the well-being. It's all a balance. And so the two go hand in hand. So I am so thrilled. Let me just add, there we go. We have all of us now to talk about this. Welcome this next panel. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this here so we could see all of your names. And this is our VC Roundtable. It's so amazing to have these women joining us that are leaders in the space in different capacity and having a large impact for other founders in seek of funding on their journey. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. As I shared earlier in the last panel, She Ventures is my third startup. Funding is a super important part of a founder's journey. And, the interesting experience I've had as a founder, I've been part of a team, one, and then solo founded two other companies, She Ventures being one of them. What's super interesting for me is that my first startup was in real estate development, pre-financial crisis of the 2008, 2009, all of that. I joined a team and we raised $20 million in 3 months. And it was fascinating to go through the experience with two male co-founders. And actually, I was technically a founding team member. But I will never, ever forget our final investment meeting where it was like seal the deal of whether we get this investment or not. And it was super intimidating. These investors had, multi-billion-dollar funds in real estate and everything else. And they had basically told the two co-founders, like, okay, this is all great, but who put together all this material? Like, who did all these, financial forecasts and everything else? They're like, oh, Georgina did. Oh, well, who's Georgina? And so it's like, no pressure. They're all coming over. And this will be the meeting that seals the deal. I have not had that experience since as a solo founder. And I am totally self-funded. I've sat in a lot of investor meetings. I used to live in San Francisco. I was there for 7 years. I've been up and down Sand Hill Road. I've met with anyone you can think of. So this panel is an open and honest dialogue as to the world of funding for women. And the reality is, it's shocking that in 2020, the number actually went down. Women-led startups received just 2.3% of VC funding. And so I don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture. I want to paint a realistic picture, but I also want to paint the picture for founders listening and for investors as to everyone's best practices. What can we do to start shifting these numbers? And what resources are available that maybe founders don't know about? Or what networks are available for investors? Because one thing I hear often from investors is we just don't know where these diverse founders are. They don't apply. I've heard this for 10 years. So anyways, that's the intro to the panel. And now I'm going to let each of you share a little bit more about yourselves and what you do. So Marisela, let's kick off with you.
Absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. I am Marisela García Márquez. And first and foremost, I just want to say, Georgina, congratulations. Congratulations on your third startup. This is really inspiring and empowering for all of us during today's panel and also for our female founders, right? I've known Georgina for some time now. I think it's been a little bit over 4 years. We are proud Latinas in the tech industry, trying to move the needle forward for our community of Latinx investors and entrepreneurs. But of course, as you know, women within our culture, we also face other internal challenges when actually it's time for us to, venture off to the workforce, and especially in the tech industry. So, Georgina, I commend you and applaud you as always. So I'm Marisela. I'm the founder of the Global Women in Venture Initiative, founded in 2019 before the pandemic, which we aim to accelerate the success of diverse women in the venture capital industry that promotes a global pipeline for female founders and investors. And through our community of colleagues, mentors, and role models, we nurture professional growth by facilitating a career development program in partnership with U.S. and international-based universities, designed to provide the knowledge, the skills, the tools that will assist female professionals to pursue a career in the venture capital industry. We are really proud to have collaborated with regional, local universities such as the University of San Francisco, Holt International Business Schools to help us launch our strategic educational workshops to empower more women, especially diverse women from underrepresented communities, to not be scared to venture off into this industry. It is intimidating. I know how I first felt when I was building my first company with emerging funds in Latin America. And, in LATAM, it is heavily male dominated. And I was this young gal in my mid-20s coming in like, I'm going to conquer LATAM. I'm going to bridge the best deals from Latin America to the US. I went to Europe. I did the same. I took my business model to Europe and I struggled. So I completely understand your pain, Georgina. And it's very tough. And when you have a name like mine, people will think twice, triple sometimes before engaging in a meeting with us. So that's a little bit of who I am.
Thank you. And she's a total rock star in helping other founders all over the world. And what I love also, investors see a different side of things as well. So I really appreciate your work and friendship. So Sruti.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Sruti Bharat, and I work at Allraise. Allraise is a nonprofit that supports founders and funders in tech. This organization started out of the Me Too movement in 2017. And I lead our venture programs as of September. And so, Marisela, we should talk because it's so important. Only 10 or 11% of check writers are women in the US. And so, part of this whole ecosystem, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is how do you get more funding to women founders? Honestly, the people writing the checks also need to be more representative of, we need to be able to see different types of business models, that diversity matters. So that's what I work on, supporting women in venture. And I'm also a founder. So I founded a nonprofit called Future Map. We work with first generation college students in their transition to career. And my experience as a founder I just felt like I was in the dark and trying to build this on my own, or maybe just with my team of women. But there's just a whole language and ecosystem I didn't feel like I was a part of. And I still don't, even though I'm working sometimes with these VCs, I still feel that imposter syndrome. And I don't necessarily have all the answers for how the magic happens. Like, how does that check get written? There is a behind the scenes, and I'm happy to try to unpack all of it, but I'm also here to empathize because I don't have all those answers. And I think I've learned a lot about that language. So I'm excited to share whatever I've learned.
Thank you. And Farah, fellow Lion, we're both LMU grads.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here and to represent. I personally am an associate at VU Venture Partners. We're a global multi-stage investment fund, and we have offices in San Francisco, New York, and Hong Kong, and we're a team of about 50 right now. I personally focus on the consumer space, but as a team, we have kind of 5 main verticals. It's consumer, enterprise, frontier, fintech, and healthcare. Something that we do to try to move the needle in terms of diversity in investing and in venture is we have a 3-month kind of apprenticeship program that we do at VU. And that encourages, females or people of color or really anyone that wants to learn more about venture capital to kind of join and learn and gain those stepping stones to be able to move into venture capital if that's an aspiration of theirs. So I'm very proud to be a part of VU and to be helping with diversity on that front.
Wonderful. And this is going to tie back to Sruti, what you were saying about who's writing the check, right? So I love the perspective we have from this panel because we're all coming at this from just for different aspects and to share our wisdom here. So, in the interest of time for people watching, I really want to share wisdom, for founders and for investors. So first, let's tap on the investor side. So for the investors that say nobody that's diverse applies to our fund. How do we unpack that? How do we unpack the access, I think is a better question, right? Because I think there's always a solution piece. To me, in my experience, and I'm still very much involved in Silicon Valley and other startup ecosystems around the world, is this access piece. And it is all about your network. So let's talk about network on both sides. And maybe some potential, not solutioning, but words of wisdom for both the investors and the founder of merging those points of access. I'll let you guys, don't be shy, just go ahead and.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what I've seen personally. So what I've seen specifically in the consumer space is a lot of female founders tend to, create products that lend to females or to women or that target the female population. And that makes sense, right? But then when they go to pitch to an all-male team, the team doesn't necessarily understand the product or the business or the value proposition, which is, a big issue. So that's kind of what I see as being, a challenge for female founders. So I think the way I start to think about combating that is both from the investor side to the LP side is actually making sure that you invest in funds with, those diverse backgrounds, because those are the people that are going to champion those types of deals and really be there for those types of founders. And then I think from the GP side, the general partner side, people that work at funds, is just to make sure that it's a priority for you to diversify your fund. We talk about it all the time. We know there's a problem with, females getting funded, people from the BIPOC community getting funded, but are we actually making it a priority to invest in those people? I would say not yet. So really making that a priority is very important at this point.
Definitely. And yes, those conversations are often had, sometimes it's, we are making an effort, but then you still look at the percentage of the portfolio. So I think it's worth asking the questions, just ask the questions because the data will give you a very clear answer. And Sruti, you guys have so many amazing programs coming through Allraise. I mean, it's been such an incredible effort in the short amount of time. Yes. And, driving a lot of impact. So and you have mentorship programs, you have all sorts of things going on. So how you're marrying the access piece.
Yeah. So Allraise has kind of 3 pillars of support. So we have guidance where for founders and investors, we have education. A lot of it is the unspoken rules, the things that you can't really just Google. It's perspectives from other women, which I think really is differentiated. So that's kind of the perspective we have around guidance. And then we have support. So we have kind of community programs, cohorts, groups where peers can actually relate, and especially for founders, like our Series A founders, for example, there aren't that many programs for women who have even raised funding and what you do next. And it's a very lonely journey. And so we have kind of this peer community. And then the last piece is access. And this is the hardest one. We talk a lot about deal flow. And I think what's really interesting to me is the funds say they can't find the founders. The founders say they can't find the funders. Like, what's happening there? To me, it's that, especially during COVID, like my hypothesis for why that number decreased is that investors relied more on the known quantities because they couldn't really build that trust with too many strangers, right? And so you end up pattern matching. And that's a huge problem, I think, in the VC space, is like pattern matching, but your patterns are flawed. And so I think they relied on traditional networks to get their deals. And so I really do think that the warm intros are really still very important for all founders. And women are under networked, frankly. And then the other piece I would say around access is something I've noticed as I build programs for VCs, is that there is a group of VCs that is very hungry for diverse deal flow, but they're not necessarily as well known. So I'm talking about emerging managers, small seed funds, angel groups like the Council Angels, or there are tons of women angel groups. And they are constantly seeking these types of founders, but because they don't have maybe as big of a check size, or maybe founders haven't heard of them, it's not as easy to make that match. So I would actually say, like, my advice to founders sometimes is, like, talk to those smaller fund managers and the diverse funds that are actually built with that thesis, because they're looking for you, and it's a matter of making the match. So it's not always that the biggest, brightest brand of fund is going to get you what you need.
No, I agree. No, 100%. And we'll touch back on the networking aspect and the warm intros, because it is really important. I mean, it's important for somebody wanting to start a career in venture, and it's also important for somebody that is looking for investment. So, Marisela?
Oh, goodness. Going back to the first point, right, Georgina, that you mentioned networks, and we've heard it here that, women are under networked, and I completely agree with that. I'm a strong advocate for women of color, especially with Latina women. I'm so passionate in moving our young professionals forward, that it is true. Those warm introductions are so imperative, but how do we even get to, building that relationship, that leads into that introduction? And I think that sometimes that is where a large gap exists in the relationship building with, potential investors, or even mentors or champions within our networks. And so it does take time. It takes a lot of personal time to invest into relationship building. And I think sometimes women, they're trying to navigate both their, professional and personal lives, that they tend to not coordinate, or they don't see, how much time they should actually be allocating to building a social network. And it is so imperative. It is so crucial to build that out, especially as a founder, and participate in events like we are here today, right, Georgina? Get yourself in front of a camera. It's a great way to engage yourself with, now more than ever, the virtual audience, given that the pandemic has minimized our networking capabilities to a certain extent, but we can still leverage technology now more than ever to gradually continue moving forward. And so I would say definitely relationship building, networks, and funds being a priority, like it has been mentioned already. It has to be completely intentional and transparent, that you do want to allocate time to someone with outside of your network, someone, it's a little bit, I think what happens as well, it's, the cultural aspect comes in. I don't know enough. I don't know if I feel comfortable. Like what is the business setting? Typically, does this culture like to navigate? And there's so many complexities when it comes to also understanding cultures. And I'm an international relations major. I worked previously in government in Latin America. So when it comes to bridging cultures and bridging that gap, like that is my jam, I always say. And so I'm so happy that I've been able to leverage my skill set within the VC and, tech female founder space. So, I mean, Georgina, I think sometimes you have to stop me because I tend to talk a lot. So
no, that's okay. All right. No.
So many points I can go on, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. No, so thinking of our audience and who might be watching, check size is always, who I love Sruti, you're saying like, what is the mystery behind the check? I mean, it's fascinating if I go back to the experience. I mean, I was so young. I was like 20, I was 25, 26. I'm 40 now. And I was just like, oh my God, I just sat in this room and like somebody like literally agreed to write us $20 million. Like that was kind of crazy. That it was like, what was it? What was the magic piece? Like what made it happen? It was an introduction to these people through a trusted source. And it was a bit of patterning because somehow they saw something in themselves and not in me and the two founders. I was like, they needed to meet me to make sure that like the person putting the finances together, knew what they were doing in order to seal the deal. And it was different, right? Because it was tangible assets, real estate investing in a real estate fund, not a fund, but development is very different than investing in tech or in other things that are less tangible, that you're focusing on traction and you're focusing on things that like, and Farah, you said this. So I can't tell you how many investors I met with the second startup that has now closed, that because it was centered towards a female audience. They're like, oh, let me talk to my wife about that.
Yeah.
And I was like, is your wife into the outdoors, travel, sports, nature?
Yeah.
No, not really. Then is she an investor? Like, then why the heck do you need to talk to your wife about it? She's not going to write me the check. Like I got very blunt. And so I want to talk about this first check, because when you're going through this and you're having lots of doors slammed in your face, because that's just what happens. Again, I'm not paying doom and gloom, but I'm like realistic with how this works. Like we have to be honest. There's always this, do a friends and family around. Now, here's where it gets interesting when it comes to difference in socioeconomic standpoint. I'm a daughter of immigrants. There is no friends and family around. There is none. I had to put myself through school, and like I grew up in a poor family. So like I would listen to this in meetings and I'm like, you have no idea where I come from, or so how do we, for founders that don't have that friends and family to go to for those first few checks, for that first tiny seed fund, what advice might you have for them? And also like, what's a substantial amount that they would need to raise before they come to you first, and with, I know your fund in particular, Farah, it's quite a big fund, right? Like you don't really write small checks. So
we do sometimes. We definitely do. So our average first check is like 200 to 500K, which I guess is considered bigger, but we have scaled down to like something like even a 50K check. We have written it, but yeah, on average, our check size is a little bit bigger. But yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. I mean, I grew up in the Middle East, so I also come from somewhere that's outside the US. And when I was a founder back in the day, I had struggled with a similar issue of, I don't necessarily have all this friends and family in the US that I can just reach out to. I don't have this huge network here, which is definitely detrimental in some way to founders. So, I mean, my advice is don't give up. There are other forms of financing. For me, I think straight to like angel groups. So angels are very helpful when you're very early stage. They can write smaller check size. You can band a bunch of them together and get a bigger check size if that's what you need. Another thing that I've seen a lot of founders be successful at is crowdfunding. That's become more popular in recent years. Again, you don't need that network, but it does help to have a little bit of money, or at least someone in marketing that can help promote that crowdfunding campaign, whatever it is. I've seen that too. And lastly, just small business loans. I mean, we know the problems with loans and loaning to women. So it's definitely not the best option, but I would revert back to the angels and the crowdfunding first, for sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And one of our founders that was just on the last panel, Lonnie, she just went through a crowdfunding effort with Start Engine that went really well. And so, yes, I mean, it is completely very possible. And I work with a lot of founders and guide them that way as well, because that's also how you can grow a community for yourself too.
Absolutely.
And there's way more options than Kickstarter. So like there's, it's just doing a little bit of research and finding the platform that best works for you.
Yeah.
Shruti?
Yes, I also put I Fund Women there as a source of grants. I had 3 thoughts. One of them is that certain times brand does help. I read this statistic that said that some over 1/3 of Black founders that got over $1 million in funding went through an accelerator of some kind. And so there are some accelerators that will broaden your network, like the YC, the Techstars, but I think there are also others. I mean, I would be careful of giving up too much equity or paying too much money for those. Allraise has a lot of free programs, but it's not an accelerator. So I think there's some understanding to have out there about, just not making the wise decision. So I think that's just one thought around like getting into a program where you have the ecosystem and the support. The other thing is the doors slammed in face comment. I actually think one thing that's interesting is that doors are slammed in male founders' faces also.
Yes.
Actually, maybe the tolerance for failure and just how we've been socialized and all of those things around confidence. But I actually think maybe reframing what failure really is, like, maybe 20 rejections feels like a lot. And to me, it does. But actually, that's normal. It maybe is actually 70 or 100 rejections. And so in some ways, it's kind of just realizing, and I career coach college students all the time. And they're like, I applied to 5 jobs and I got rejected. And I'm like, you have to be applying to 100, so it's just reframing a little bit. Like, yes, it's discouraging, but it's not as discouraging as you may feel, because those are actually the numbers that are standard. And my last thought there is venture capital worth it? Because one of the things I'm always deciding as a founder is like, it comes with more strings attached and stress than some founders may realize. You may think that like a $500K check is a game changer, but actually it adds a lot of expectations. That means that you need to be guaranteeing some kind of exit. You have a plan to be in a $1 billion market. And so I actually do think that sometimes bootstrapping or building a product via sales that's not a bad way to like build your confidence, build your product, not go into debt, and there's so many no code or low code options where you can create a product fairly quickly without needing to invest in a developer, so those are just a few of my perspectives.
No, they're all great points. Thank you so much. And I do agree with the reframing. Gosh, I had to. I mean, this isn't like, rejections in life with fundraising. I mean, that's just like life, right? And if you're taking big risk and you're taking big risks of any kind and taking big leaps, I think that's always like founders are visionaries. We see what the rest of the world can't see yet.
Right.
And so that alone, you're going into a meeting and you have this like oasis, beautiful, whatever it is in your mind, and you're trying to sell that, and the other person's looking at you like, I don't see it yet, And so there's that lost in translation piece. And that's where it's like data is great. And that's where the crowdfunding can be really helpful. If you have some data to show, like you have a community behind you, or you have some pre-sales behind you, or whatever it is, So, Marisela?
Yes, and I actually want to answer this question more with the perception of an experience coming from a female founder of an underserved community, so from Black and Brown women. These resources are out there, but they don't necessarily are geared or created to attract our community of female founders. And so since I've had a lot of, hands-on experience with, Black and Brown, primarily Latina founders, I realized that we had to actually go and build out the resources that we found that have already been created within our own community. And for instance, accelerators, I am a fan of the accelerator business model. I do find them to be successful. They help enable our entrepreneurs to garner, institutional funding. And there's other resources that are already provided, like programming, mentorship, and access to an extended network. And these are all resources that are so critical to, every entrepreneur. But the challenges for Black and Brown women are very different. And we need to have that compassion and that understanding of that, our needs are different. And so I always go ahead and advise our Latino entrepreneurs to, let's look at the existing accelerators. For instance, the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. I've been, very active with their community in bridging international capital as well. So besides guiding them so they can get the mentorship, I also went ahead and extended my global network of investors, because as I was building out my own, company, I realized that, getting access to US funding is very challenging. This is going to take me a long time. But at the same time, I leverage my international network, my network in Latin America. I went and I knocked at those doors in family offices, in financial institutions, emerging VC funds. And what I did is I leveraged the power of my network in LATAM to then also educate Latin American investors as to why they should invest in US-based Hispanic men and women, and start facilitating those cross-border investments into our own community. And I think sometimes there's not enough research that's done from both parties. And if we look at the Hispanic market itself in the US, our GDP is equivalent to the 8th largest economy in the world. And when you know your data and you know the value that US Latinos and Latinas bring to our country, and you bridge those opportunities for international investors, it's just a pipeline of that you're growing of success for both the investor and the founder.
Thank you. And I think that's a really great point. It's an aspect of relatability, right? So whoever's going to invest in you, they do ultimately need to see a little bit of something within themselves in you. That is part of the, I think, check writing
Correct.
Magic piece. We're being mindful of time. I know we could talk about this topic for forever. I want to touch on, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Who knew that plus a year later we would still be here? What advice or words of wisdom do you have for founders trying to fundraise in this environment, or if there's any trends or anything that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think for me, I'll just say the 3 pieces of advice I'll always say is take risks. The first one, definitely take risks. 2, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. I know as women, we tend to shy away from asking for things that we need or want. So whether it's funding or introductions or advice from other founders, don't be afraid to ask for what you want, what you need. And finally, just keep pushing through hard times. There are definitely going to be hard times ahead. You're going to face a lot of rejections, a lot of no's from people. Don't give up on your dreams and keep pushing ahead. There's light at the end of the tunnel for sure.
Thank you.
I love that. And I would say for me, it's one is approach networking as authentically as you can. So you're matchmaking, you're trying to find someone that's just as passionate about your vision as you are. And so, I think part of it is, yes, it feels like sales and all of that, but if you can be yourself and just sell your vision, and you'll find someone that resonates with it. The other thing I think is, I personally somehow have a lot of aversion to like presenting my pitch deck for feedback. It feels so vulnerable, and like just doing that practice pitch. But I think that is really important, like and not just from investors, but like getting feedback from friends and family who are like, I don't understand what you're saying. I think sometimes I am afraid of getting criticism, or I want it to be really perfect before I get the feedback. So that's just something I noticed in myself. I'm sure maybe others have that as well. So get the feedback. And my last thing is, the pandemic has been really tough on women. I also think coming out of it, it has shed a light on a lot of societal inequities. There's a whole care package that Biden administration just pushed through for childcare. Their investors are now taking Zoom meetings with people they didn't before. I've heard some investors say they've started relying more on Twitter DMs. So I actually think in some ways this has democratized access to different types of people. And so just, use this to your advantage as well.
No, 100%. Like, we're in a virtual world now, and so it's there should be no barriers in terms of geography, which before used to be, right? It's like, oh, I can't get myself to Silicon Valley. Well, it's like now, as much as you can to grow and meaningfully try to expand your network, which means like you're pushing out of your comfort zone by making the ask, but also the other people are too, right? By maybe getting out of their comfort zone to talk to somebody that they normally wouldn't have.
Right.
Marisela?
These are, as we all know, very difficult times. Many of us, have been placed in isolation, of course. And I think that for, the health aspect, the emotional and the mindset and taking all this into account while we're navigating, still questionable waters, it can be very overwhelming, right? And people are also scared. And so I think for female founders, it's real. We know it's already tough out there, right? But I think it's first step, it's identifying and establishing a network within your own family, because they're family and friends, people that genuinely believe in you, who want to see you succeed, and surround yourself with those individuals. Also create your network around mentors and champions, again, that believe in you, that believe in your product, in your platform, and have continuous conversations. I myself, every single Friday, I have a 1 hour session with my mentor. He's based in New York. I'm in San Francisco. But I've established that 1 hour every single Friday to ensure that what I'm doing is working or it's not working. And I also just, recommend founders to own their story, to be able to create a compelling narrative that engages an audience, right? I think as women, we mentioned it previously already, that we tend to be a little bit more conservative. We minimize our accomplishments, but communication is a vital piece to help others understand the value that we bring, and we must own our narrative to increase the visibility and our credibility as well.
Thank you. I knew we would run out of time so quickly. So I just want to share that all of their bios are up on the website under the speakers page. I hope that this conversation, at least between us, continues. I truly believe in collaboration, and each of us on this video call, whatever we want to call it, we all have our own networks and things like that. And so I mean, and anybody that's listening, if you're an investor and you're wanting to grow your reach, like, please, like, we only drive change when we come together. Like, working in silos is doesn't work. And for founders, out there, this pandemic has been super challenging. I love what you said, Sruti. Use it to your advantage. So like, we've also learned a lot about ourselves and as a society, right? Like, what our needs are and the connection that we need and things like that. So I think we just need to be a little bit creative in how we continue to connect and help each other. So I do believe, though, that the world will be a better place with more women getting funding And it's really incredible what happens when we have equal opportunities, right? And we start to level this playing field, both also, within working at VCs too. So thank you so much for your time and for being a part of the panel, and for everybody that's listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And we're going to jump.
Everyone.
We're going to jump to our next panel. So thank you.
Thanks.
All right.